Happy to see you, Annalisa.
Nice to see you too.
How are you doing?
Fine, fine. Still surviving. That's good. And still healthy, which is even better.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. And how are your family?
Yeah, but what about you?
Yeah, I'm in a new house.
Oh, wow, amazing. I hope you have not gotten rid of your construction, which is
The
fascinating.
roller coaster is in a different room now. Yeah,
Oh.
I was just building it. Hi, Olga.
Hello,
I thought
Olga.
Olga was on the phone.
Hello, Annalisa. Hello, Nick. Great to see
Hi,
you.
Olga. How do I say good morning or good afternoon?
Добрый день. Добрый день.
Добрый день. Добрый день.
Okay.
Oh, it's great to see you.
I'm
Great
so
to see
excited,
you.
really excited.
Wonderful, wonderful event. Lovely.
Would you like to check your presentation, Nick, before we start?
Yeah, let me do that. So if I share my screen, it will look like that.
Oh, great. We can see you.
Great. So
usually we do like that. We have 45 minutes for the presentation, then 15 minutes for, this is the time for the discussant. Then we have an open discussion. And in case people, feel shy or whatever, we put the questions that were sent in advance in the chat, and we start with these questions.
that's lovely. And people, I'm very happy for people to put in the chat directly to me if they don't want to make it a public question, or afterwards, my email address, whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had misunderstood something because I tried to squeeze my comments in 15 minutes. So it was quite a challenge, I must say, but if I have more time, I'm happy about it.
Should I be worried, Annalisa?
No, on the contrary, it was very interesting.
But you see, we usually give like 15 minutes exactly after the presentation for the discussant, but you would also have more time if you want after that, in the time of the discussion.
And I will try and maybe go a little faster, but slow me down if you think. When I'm excited, Olga, I speak really quickly, and I already speak English badly. So if I'm speaking too fast for people to follow, you should just yeah.
Have mercy on us, please. I know that you and Olga have studied in Oxford, but I haven't.
One of my favorite reviewer comments was that I should have my paper reviewed by somebody who speaks English.
Please, this is enough. No way. I don't believe a word.
And what is your first language?
My first
English.
language.
Yes.
Oh, Nick, please, this is enough, really. Come on, your texts are beautiful in English.
Well, apparently not this one. So Olga, I'll leave it to you to decide, when to start, if we want to give people a couple of minutes. I'm just saying hello to the names I can see.
We
Sonia,
can, yeah, I think it's 3 to 12. Let's wait a little bit.
And I'm trying my Cyrillic here. Is that Tatiana Hoskakova? Maybe?
Yeah, so Tatiana is the host of the Zoom.
Hello, I'm just someone who tries not to ruin Zoom connection.
And
so if Tatiana...
Alisa Troshina, is that right? Alisa Troshina? And my Cyrillic is very poor. Nastu Maria? Oh, that's Greek, isn't it? Lovely to see all these people here. Andrew, Atula, Helena, Julia, Ruhala, Lutho, Diego. No. Garnik, maybe? Garnik, Akolov?
Yes, hello. I'm from Samara. Hello, I'm glad for your seminar.
Hello.
Very good, Tim.
We are also trying today an online translation on Facebook. You see, we have this live on Facebook. So that
Wow.
maybe someone is also watching us. Usually we have people on YouTube watching, because you know it's actually very, very diverse. We have a very diverse audience, and in some places, you know, it's just very difficult to find the appropriate time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Olga, for being flexible in adjusting the time of day a little bit to accommodate the Australian.
So what time is it now in Australia?
It's 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
Yeah, on Thursday. I'm joking. It's still
Thursday.
Monday.
Okay, so you're already, yeah. That's amazing.
And coming into winter now. Well, yeah, the autumn period. Yeah, so getting darker and cooler.
And how is now the situation in Australia? Do you have lockdowns, or what does it look like?
So today, interestingly, is the first day that we've been allowed to travel overseas. So we can fly to New Zealand from today without quarantine. But other than that, the national border is completely shut. But then after that, there's no restrictions. You can dance, you can, you know, buses are full, trains are full, no masks, nothing. Okay. Just the border's shut. So
okay, well.
Yeah. And not much vaccination going on, but nobody's dying here from COVID. So the vaccine should be somewhere else. Yeah, like they don't need them here yet.
What are the numbers then you have then? So you are not having any more worrisome numbers?
No. We've not had any cases this year.
But
like,
this is fantastic. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear.
So there were a few in quarantine when the people arrive, you know, kind of Australians coming home, they have to go in quarantine for 2 weeks, and some of them have COVID. And I think like one doctor got COVID from the hotel. And what they do if they get that, they just lock down that city for like 3 days, complete lockdown. And yeah,
that must be a good strategy.
Very good.
I think it helped that we're a big island, and straight away they just shut the borders this time last year, like in March. And nobody comes in, nobody goes out.
Okay. So I think it's already 12:01. So probably we can start, and those who want, they can join anytime. Good day, good evening, good morning for those of you who are coming from all over the world. You're very welcome at the meeting of Moscow Chat Reading Club. I'd like to say a few words about our project. We started it in October 2020 in the situation of lockdowns, and we had this idea of trying to cross the borders and organize something online, something available for everyone. And we've already had a few meetings, very interesting discussions, and we hope to continue making it a platform for cross-disciplinary and cross-international dialogue for all those who are interested in cultural historical theory and activity approach. So today we have, as already traditionally we do, we have a presentation which will be given by Nick Hopwood, education researcher and professor at the University of Technology from Sydney, Australia. And we have discussant Annalisa Sannino, professor at the Faculty of Education and Culture in Tampere University in Finland. Just a small reminder, so usually we have 45 minutes for presentation, 15 minutes for the discussant, and then we have all the time necessary for discussing, asking questions, giving comments. This time we've received quite a few questions to the presenter. We will put them in chat, and so people who send the questions might hear the answers or might comment back. So please be active, be interactive, participate. And I'm wishing everyone a pleasant seminar. So Nick, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Olga. You can hear me okay? Good morning to those of you west of Moscow, and good afternoon in Moscow. And because I'm here in Australia, the first thing I need to do is acknowledge the land which I am on. I'm on the land of the Garigal people. That's the indigenous group who used to live, or still live, where I now live. And their land was never ceded. Sovereignty of that land was never ceded. And it's customary in Australia for us to acknowledge that and to pay respects to the elders of the Garigal people as traditional custodians of knowledge for this space over tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. I'm going to show you a picture first, and then I'm going to start my presentation. And if you remind me, I'll come back to the picture. Olga, can you see a picture of a young boy with a chef's hat?
Yes, I did.
Okay, this is Henry, who I met on Friday. Henry has a metabolic condition, which means it's pretty dangerous for him to eat. So every night he has a pump which attaches to his stomach, and that's when he gets his nutrition. Recently, he's started eating a little bit through his mouth and through a cup, and it'll be like this for his whole life. And one day he wrote that the kitchen is his favorite room in the house, and it made me and his mum cry to think of this for a boy for whom feeding was such a barrier and an obstacle and an exclusion, for him to say that. And he loves cooking and he wants to be a chef. And on Friday, I had the extraordinary privilege of being given a cooking lesson by him. He also has autism. And one moment during this cooking, he got the syringe. He asked his mum to get a syringe out, which is what he'd normally use to feed. And you can see him in this picture using the syringe to put caramel in the middle of his dessert. I will tell you later why I think there's a lot of transformative agency happening here, but some people are asking about transformative agency in childcare and things like that. And I think there is a real interesting thing here. And I had a wonderful day with Henry. And now, if you remind me later, I'll come back to him because I think it's a nice concrete example. And now I will go on and actually share my slides, and just Olga, ask you for a nod if you can see them.
Yes, perfect.
Yes. So the first thing I think when I think about agency and chat is that cultural historical activity theory, I think, has always been about change. Whether that's Seth Chaiklin and the way he talks about being interested in phenomena in motion, but also, and sort of not like fixing the world and trying to figure out how it is now, which in fact can sentences us to look at how it was yesterday. But also that chat is not happy just to describe change, but generally to try and promote change, directly or more or less directly. And then I don't think you can get far into thinking about change when it involves human beings without thinking about agency. That's my view. And yet, agency is an awkward concept that I think has been overlooked, particularly in the way that Marx has been interpreted in the West, and seen as somewhat as an awkward concept, perhaps for good reasons. And I think there is now, over the past perhaps decade, perhaps more, intensifying, I think more recently, a move to reclaim agency within chat, but also outside of chat. I think you really do see this, because we can now treat and investigate and promote agency without having to have isolated individuals as these heroes doing the work. The agency was awkward because it seemed to place us on a choice between individual heroes or societal structures. We don't have to make that choice anymore. That's part of reclaiming agency. And there are languages to describe this as perhaps being at the nexus or the intersection, I guess, of individual and collective planes, or through concepts like practices. And in these different currents of reclaiming agency, in chat, what I think makes agency particularly interesting in chat, and also special in chat, is that whichever way you look at it, you see agency as being contingent on the availability and the take-up of cultural tools. And I already know that I'm using English badly here because tools and signs, it's a whole thing. I'm just using the word tools for now to regard to anything that might work on directly on nature or concepts and things like that. I know there are people who are more precise in their English than I am. So I came to Annalisa's work because for me, it was a real breakthrough way into agency through this concept of double stimulation. And I have to be careful here because Annalisa is in the room. So the way through Annalisa's work, I saw double stimulation kind of diffracted in different ways, specified for having somewhat different meanings in ways that had previously been sort of muddled for me. So the one was, we might know that you might tie a knot in your handkerchief to remember something. Or if you've got to jump into cold water, you might say 1, 2, 3, go. Like kind of, so I saw that as double stimulation about people use tools and signs to do things that are difficult to do. Like we don't just in our hearts decide to jump, we use language and all sorts of things. Double stimulation appears again in the weighting experiment, which Annalisa then reran, which is you set up an artificial conflict of motives, having a clock as a second stimulus. And so you ask people to wait indefinitely, and you see that people use the clock to decide when they're going to leave, this kind of endless waiting. And so that was double stimulation as an experimental method to really trace higher psychological functions. There is also double stimulation as widely referred to as kind of similar to or sometimes the same as mediation. And that comes up, for example, when Anne Edwards talks about common knowledge, which is a label, and I think she would agree, where neither of the words really points to what it's describing because it's nothing common and it's not really to do with knowledge. But common knowledge is an understanding of what matters to somebody else. And Anne Edwards says, when you have an understanding of what matters to somebody else and you're collaborating with them, that understanding can mediate that collaboration. It works as a second stimulus to the collaboration. So we have double stimulation there. We have it in change laboratories, the first stimulus being the problem or the object that's being worked on, and the second stimulus, the tools of chat, for example, representations of activity systems. And then, for me, the breakthrough was, in Annalisa's model, double stimulation, I think, becomes most exciting, which is when it's explicitly a principle of volitional action. So as in, it's a way in which we escape from trap situations and we take control of our own behavior, linked particularly to conflicts of motives. And when you carry that idea forward, as Annalisa has, what you get is a basis for transformative agency. And as we're starting to see, expansive links to new concepts like warping. Now, I don't necessarily think these are all I'm not so interested in kind of setting up a typology of double stimulation. That's not the point. Just to say, when you come across it in the literature, at least when it's translated into English, you find it referring to quite different things. And I find it helpful to kind of sharpen my own thoughts to sort of lay them out like that. These are in some senses artificial and a little bit problematic. But the important thing is that through Annalisa's work, I got this idea that double stimulation can be the basis for transformative agency, something much bigger than just deciding to jump into a pool of cold water. Previously, in research with professionals who visit families, so here in Australia, if you're a parent and you have a young child and you're struggling with something, maybe how they sleep or they had a behavior or they're feeding, you can call your doctor. They'll send a nurse to your home. The nurse can come to your home a few times, or you can go to a clinic, or you can go to all sorts of other support groups, all for free. I followed a lot of these people in their work, and what I found was the professionals who were making a really big difference in these families were addressing an absence, but it wasn't an absence of love in the mother, or some kind of deficit like a broken child, even though that was often how the parents described their children, or an absence of knowledge or care in the mother. What it was the absence of that second stimulus, the absence of the auxiliary stimulus to help parents take control over their actions. And that outcomes when you're intervening as a professional in families like this were arising, there were developments in the families which arose from tool use that elicited new responses. So I'll say that in a bit clearer English, that progress in the families, positive lasting change in families, happened when professionals helped those families use tools, new tools, or use the same tools but differently, in a way that made new actions possible, new interpretations of a child's behavior possible. What I also found was that the presence of these tools was not automatic, and that work had to be done to make these tools acceptable and stable in families where things were really difficult. And that happened through what I've called here progressive cultivation. By progressive, I mean like ratcheting up and kind of building and accumulating and expanding and going forwards. And cultivation is like, it's like what a farmer does to crops. It takes work and care and effort. And so through that process, the effects of tools could be amplified or magnified. And that happened through complexes of decisions and actions. So it wasn't just a one-off, I need to jump into some cold water, 1, 2, 3, go. It was a series of actions and decisions which progressively cultivated the use of tools, which furthered different actions. So you had this kind of iterative aspect to it, which led me to describe double stimulation in the wild, and I know there's a question about that, as dispersed, meaning spread out, iterative, meaning it doesn't just happen once and you're done, recursive, meaning that the first iteration has implications for the next, which has implications for the next, but also fragmented and multi-threaded, meaning if you're to look at the history of a positive change in a family, where relationships with children and their conditions of development really change, you don't address it all in one go. And in fact, you don't address it all in any one moment of double stimulation. Double stimulation addresses parts of the whole. And so in that sense, it's multi-threaded. I think, Annalisa, at one point in South Africa, you had a metaphor of a rope, like lots of different threads. I'm sure you had a slide with a thick rope on it. So something like, that's what I mean by multi-threaded, like lots of parts that have to come together to make something stronger. When I went into these organizations that were employing the professionals going to families, by the way, Olga, how am I doing with my speech? Am I going too fast, too slow? Is it okay?
Everything is perfect.
Okay. One of the leaders of these organizations said, Nick, you're welcome to come and shadow my staff and follow them in their work, but we do not need you, some smart person from university, to tell us that we need more time and money. We know that, and it's not happening. So I was like, okay, so I have to conclude something else then, which made me think about how can we use research to find ways that professionals use this very precious time that they have with families to greater effect. They would love to spend all day, they get 40 minutes. How can we make that 40 minutes count for even more? And so this time was in short supply. So what that made me look for is small things that had big effects and things that were already possible within the professional's skills, language, and existing ways of working. And what I really like about that was that I don't see chat as a theory that's rigid about scale. You can look at something tiny and at the same time be addressing something big. I think I see that in Annalisa's work on homelessness, on so much work, Matt Cole's work similarly. So looking for small things with big effects, I think chat is a great theory, because just because you're looking at the small doesn't stop you seeing the big. So by small, I mean local and temporary, and by big, I mean spread out and long lasting. And so there are conflicts of motives that you can find in parenting young children. Some of these written about, some of these I found in. So this is just to kind of get a little bit of a feel for double stimulation in the way that Annalisa's model describes it. So for example, when you have a child who's hungry, you find a stimulus on one side that is them saying they're hungry, like they might be crying, or children do different things to indicate hunger. And with that stimulus, you have a motive to provide nutrition for the child to satisfy their hunger. But you also get the child crying and refusing food and pushing it away and throwing the spoon on the floor and closing their mouth. And the motive there is, I don't want to distress my child. I want to calm my child down. And so you want to feed your child, but you don't want to upset them. There's your conflict. The same thing with behavior. You know, children kick and scream, so you want to keep them safe. But also, they're telling you, I want you to go away. Or it seems like they're telling you that. And you want to avoid that kind of negative relationship with a child. Child shows signs that they're sleepy, and you want to help them sleep. But then when you put them down in their cot, they scream at you and tell you they want to sleep, they want to stay awake. And then there's one for the version for adults is, you get all these demands from your child, and yet you're also feeling exhausted, and that through your exhaustion, you can't be the mother or father that you know your child needs you to be. And so what do? Do you have the rest you know you need to be a good parent, or do you do what your child wants you to do right now? Impossible. Parenting is full of these moments. And I saw it only after reading Annalisa's work, because she really draws our attention to conflicts in a way that other models of double stimulation don't so much. So parenting is tough, that's why. We come now to the one family, Ching and Fia. That's not their real names. Ching was born in China and at a very young age moved to Australia. Had postnatal depression, that's PND. And at the time when she was visited by a nurse, was seeing a psychiatrist. Her daughter Fia, 7 months old at the time, and the doctors were very concerned that the child wasn't gaining weight. And in Australia, if that happens long enough, the government can take your child away from you. Like it's quite a serious thing if children don't put on weight when they're small. Meal times for Chia and Fing were not fun. Chia was so worried about her daughter eating that she was forcing food into her mouth, and Fia was pushing it away and spitting it out. Ching sought help in this case through a course called Circle of Security Parenting. I'll just call it Circle of Security for now. She didn't have to pay for it, and she asked to go. The history of change for Ching and Fia, and I'll go a little bit more quickly now because this is in the paper, so hopefully a bit familiar, began by breaking away from the conflicted situation. I want Fia to feed, but I don't want to keep this distress going when she's refusing it. And yeah, if I don't feed her, there's no weight gain, and if I do feed her, she hates me and pushes it away. The concepts from Circle of Security redirected Ching's attention, providing her with new motives, auxiliary motives. First one, to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. It's one of the most beautiful phrases I heard that year from Circle of Security, that as a parent, it's always your job to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. To identify her shark music. Shark music is the idea that you could imagine you're on a beach and it's lovely and there's no wind and the sea is calm and everything is nice. And yet for some other parent, there's like because something is stressing them out. We all have our shark music. A moment in life where for everybody else, it's normal. And for you, it's like Jaws, you know, the shark attack in your head. It's that music going. Once you can name it and spot it, you can have a different relationship with that trigger. You change your relationship with it. So Ching meal times became about being bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind with Fia, identifying her shark music and calling it that and being calm, to be a cheerleader in meals and offering excitement and joy, rather than worrying about her job being to get food into the stomach. It was her job to make meals fun, and to hear Fia's message and respond, rather than see it as a question of food in the mouth. And so this is what we get Ching saying, I realize she's not against me. She's not angry with me. She just can't control the time because she's so tired. So that was Ching hearing the message that actually what she thought was Fia saying, I don't want to eat, was actually Fia saying, I'm really tired. And so it helped them change the times of when they were eating. They actually got bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. And I have to keep myself, especially with the kind one. And kindness was something that Ching described as not having received from her own parents very much. And so the refusal to feed kept going for a while, but now Ching was staying calmer and was giving Fia opportunities to explore and freedom to choose. And she sees that as being really important to her daughter learning to eat. So if we look at the history of change here, the solution emerged through these concepts: bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, shark music, being a cheerleader, and hearing Fia's message. But you could sit in any seminar that you like and think they're lovely concepts and nothing will happen. These concepts have to be anchored, and I use that word because it's something that Annalisa has taken up later, into the material realm. We have to ground these concepts somewhere. in some cases, that was the most intimate grounding you can have in the body. So it's okay to say, I have a motive to stay calm. How do you do that when your heart's pounding and your child is crying and you want them to eat? Well, breathing and perhaps turning away. So we anchor these concepts in the body, in bodily practices. And what we see here is these concepts, like if you have a map and you have, here's a destination, here's the road. Okay, well, concepts were doing that in the sense that they were helping Ching figure out what to do, what order to do things in, why to do certain things. Like if fear does this, then I will do that. If fear does something else, then I will do something differently. And also help her get a sense of where to, which was, it wasn't just a constant battle of success or failure is defined by how much food goes from this plate into Fear's mouth. It was a different thing. It was about me and Fear on a journey of understanding each other and me supporting her and helping her explore food in her world. What was going on there was what Irio has called an different epistemic levels of mediation. So we have, I think, a very clear case that Ching was able to take control of her behavior and act differently around her daughter in feeding. From an impossible situation to some volitional action, I think is a relatively straightforward case to make. But transformative agency, it's not the same thing. And I think we have to be really careful analytically before we leap to say that volitional action through double stimulation is a principle that can get you to transformative agency means that we can't just say as soon as somebody's resolved one particular conflict, necessarily we have transformative agency. So I was asking, does Ching's actions transform the conditions of her parenting, not just a situation? Because if they do, then maybe we're closer to something that is worthy of the title transformative agency. And I think they did change the conditions of her parenting. The concepts and the embodied actions associated with them provided a stable basis, even as the conflicted situation changed. So at first, it was trying to force feed Fear. Then, after I interviewed 6 months later, the latest issue was teething, when the child's teeth were coming through and there was a lot of pain and something else was going on with the food. Then when she got older still, 18 months later, it was about Fear playing with food, which a lot of toddlers do. They suddenly get really into the textures and want to make a big mess and they know it upsets you. Different conflicts there, same embodied actions and concepts helping her deal with them. So I think, yes, there's a different condition there. It's not just a one-off solution. There was evidence, I think, of warping. Now, this is Annalisa's concept. Warping is, normally you might drop, and I hope I'm getting this right, Annalisa, you might drop an anchor if you were on a boat. You drop the heavy thing in order to stop the boat drifting. Like to stop the boat moving, you need it to stay still and you drop the anchor. That happens. There's another reason why, and I didn't know this, that people drop anchors in boats. And it's when they want to move. And you can drop the anchor and you can pull on it. So like if you need to go against the current in a river, for example, you can drop the anchor, pull on it, throw it again. So anchors, what they do is they get their fixedness at the bottom, enabling you to move at the top. Apparently that's called a kedge anchor. I learned all this from Annalisa. And the process that this movement through providing stability on the bottom is called warping. And so I do think this is what was happening in Ching's family, that the tools were used not just to fix the problem of a mealtime, but to move as a family, to change the way we related to each other and what Fear's role in this family was. And there was a question about the father, and I will answer it later. So this involved expansions such as enrolling the husband into the new practices, which was another whole big part of the story for Ching. And there's a question, so I'll come back to that. And I think this really was, so I think we've got agency rather than just action. Was it transformative? I think so. Like kindness, for example, was not easily available to Ching from her own history. She didn't describe her own childhood as one with a lot of kindness shown to her. She didn't really know how to be kind to Fear, how to show kindness. And so, like, I think that's a big deal. Like to go from these fights with the daughter to a model of parenting really based on kindness, I think we have transformation. Then I looked at some wider data, and this I found like this dialectic function where you have expansive learning, which is learning something that nobody knew before, not replacing old knowledge, but more complex understandings, new possibilities for interpretation, was part of how we accomplish volitional actions and a result of them. That's why I say it's dialectic, that you need the expansive learning in order for these volitional actions to take place. But through those volitional actions, you expand your understanding of the object, like how as a parent I can help my child grow. And transformative agency, over and over again, with all the, I don't know, 70 parents or something that I followed, developed through the formation of new motives. There's your kind of double stimulation, and they're anchoring in material and embodied practice with different levels of epistemic mediation. What to do, why to do it, how to do it, in what order, and where we're going with it. And again, this is why I'm calling it iterative. It's not just a once and for all thing. I learn something and then the agency can happen, or I do the agency thing and then the learning happens. They're dialectic. They refuel and further and amplify each other, which is, I guess it's perhaps inevitable that you conclude this from chat, but I think it's the other way around. I think this is why chat is such an important theory, because I think the world is dialectic and we need theories that can actually address that complexity. And so expansive learning, volitional action through double stimulation create arrays of possibilities, enabling and resulting from each other. And always in the center of it are new motives. So I'm really interested in your existing questions, particularly on how to distinguish empirically and conceptually between volitional actions and transformative agency, whilst also remaining focused on the dynamics of relationships between them. I don't think it's so helpful just to kind of say, this is volitional action and this is transformative agency. I'm only interested in trying to analytically sharpen those ideas because I'm interested in how they relate to one another, not to separate them. It's to distinguish them conceptually so we can better understand their dynamic relations. And also to think about other emerging concepts within chat traditions that strengthen our understanding of agency, particularly those concepts which, if they're in chat, are the nexus of individuals and collectives, no individual hero, but we don't lose sight of the individual just because we say things are also social, and where we see things being contingent on cultural tools. So that's where that kind of paper takes me, where a lot of my thinking is. Now, I'll go back to Henry, the young boy. Why do I think there's a lot of transformative agency happening for, I promise I'll stop soon, where is the picture, this young man? Well, firstly, he's decided his future. He wants to be a chef. He is not accepting the status quo, which is a life of battle with food. Food is something that he's going to find joy in and be known for. His parents have decided to make food a thing for him by including him in every single mealtime, every birthday party, every trip to the restaurant or the cafe. He's always been included in food and through food. His parents have the view that the tube fills his stomach, but sharing a meal fills his heart. And it's this, oh my God, it's just the most beautiful thing, right? The tube is what fills his stomach, but it's eating together that fills his heart. Here we have this young boy saying, I want to be a chef. I'm going to come and teach this professor how to make a chocolate pudding, which he invented by himself, by the way, it's his own recipe. And then at this moment where he says, can I have a syringe? And he's faced with this little problem of how do you get the syrup in it? And in this moment, he takes a piece of technology that's so tied to his disability, to his dysfunctional body and the fact that he can't really chew. And what does he do? He uses it in this inspiring moment of creativity to solve the problem of how you get caramel inside a chocolate pudding. Him in the orbit of his family and his loving parents and the people around him, the fact that you see a 7-year-old like this with autism who can't eat, cooking with somebody else, and then trying a little bit at the end. I've got a picture with him with the sprinkles on his lips. This is him saying, there's different futures out there. There's the one that's given for me, which is one of exclusion, of battle with food. And there's the one I'm choosing, which is food is my life. I'm going to be a chef and I'm going to enjoy it. And actually, I can reappropriate the tools that are part of my problem with food and make them part of my solution. If that's not the cusp or the start of a life full of transformative agency, I do not know what is. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was really, really very interesting and very dynamic and emotional. I think we were all listening very, very carefully. At least I was definitely, absolutely involved. So Annalisa, please, the word to you. And by the way, I've put a few questions and a few answers that Nick have sent us because he had written the answers actually. Thank you very much for this. I will put the rest also on the chat. And if people who ask the questions are here, and if you would like to further discuss that, you will be very welcome after Annalisa. So please, Annalisa, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So warmest greetings from Tampere University to the colleagues in Moscow and to those joining from other locations. Nice to see so many familiar faces. I am grateful, particularly to Olga, for inviting me to be part of this event. The topic of this event being at the core of my work, this invitation was very much welcomed. More specifically, commenting on Nick's work is for me always a constructive exercise, ever since I noticed his interest in double stimulation when I was writing in 2013, 2014, this article which led to the TADS model in 2015. In this commentary, I'm going to proceed in 3 steps. First, I will mention the significance of this article by Nick and Belinda within the broad framework of studies of agency, and why this is an important contribution to this framework in the making. And then I will touch upon, this will be my second step, I will touch upon some key aspects which make this commentary significant for me, for my own thinking about TADS, transformative agency by double stimulation. As many of you are aware of, I see this as a very long-term journey, which started in 2008 for me, and it is still very much at its beginning. And in this journey, I do feel that there are quite many struggles to face. And the work of Nick has always been very significant to take full consideration of some of these challenges and opening up new ones on the way. As a third step, I will present some friendly criticisms, as it is always a joy to tease Nick, just a little bit. So the first step, the significance of this article by Nick and Belinda within the framework of studies of agency. Now, this broad framework is dominated by certain authors, certain approaches since nearly a century. One, in the case of Bandura, one can say that that's definitely almost a century. This article is a contribution, in my view, which supports the development of an approach to agency which is unique within the broad framework of studies of agency. And it is unique in 2 ways. Number one, this approach enables tracing the actual unfolding of transformative agency process. Then this approach enables further expansion on the notion of agency from inner psychological properties toward external artifacts. Too much of studies of agency have been focusing on inner psychological properties. And this is a very serious problem when one is struggling with how to support agency in the making, how to devise useful pedagogical approaches to this end. In fact, this is really, really something we do not know very well yet. What makes this significant is that studies of agency have not been able to do this, especially when it comes to transforming activities with their division of labor, with their rules. So this is a major contribution which chat can make to the literature and the pedagogy of fostering transformative agency. But as I said, this is a complex endeavor for which we need to really join forces in chat framework, because this framework is so resourceful toward this end. So if we ask ourselves where research on agency and dominant practices of fostering agency have largely failed, it is clear that they have failed to generate capabilities for collectives to join forces and change the course of unsustainable conditions of learning, living, and being. The climate crisis is a prime example of this, but also the context, such as the one described in this article, in which vulnerable families find themselves in great distress. These are contexts which really can benefit from a novel approach to a transformative agency built on chat. So do we have robust frameworks to grasp how research on agency can team up with institutions and other societal actors to learn to act effectively toward facing these challenges? No, we do not have such frameworks. Do we have frameworks to systematically foster and support this type of agency? No, we don't have such frameworks. What we have is a strong basis to establish such frameworks by building on chat. And this article by Nick and Belinda is a contribution toward this direction. Now I move to my second step in this commentary, and I will touch upon some key aspects which make this commentary significant for my own thinking about TADS and the next steps. As it is typical in my experience of relating to Nick's work, also while producing this commentary, I found myself squarely in my zone of proximal development when it comes to my attempts at developing a theory of transformative agency. Delving into the distinction between volitional action and transformative agency, which is at the core of Nick and Belinda's paper, has not really been my concern so far. But when reading this article, I could not help asking myself, should I focus on this distinction or not? I have not focused on this distinction for several reasons. One reason being that transformative agency is a modern expression, to my knowledge, which did not belong to the vocabulary of Vygotsky, and this approach to agency stems directly from my reading of this text that was most likely written in 1931. So perhaps even more importantly, this distinction does not seem to be a concern in Vygotsky writing on volitional action by double stimulation. Yet one cannot argue that transformative agency as we understand it today was a concern for Vygotsky. It was definitely a concern for him. Vygotsky is clear that the emergence and consolidation of volitional actions by double stimulation is a longitudinal process, which therefore transcends a specific situation of facing conflict of motives. So should I focus on this distinction or not? Following up on Nick and Belinda's invitation in this article, this remains for me an open question. One other reason I found myself squarely in my zone of proximal development when reading this article is that I see as the optimal way of studying TADS the use of video recorded processes in which we can trace transformative agency by double stimulation development in vivo. That is why my team and I worked on the weighting experiments, in which we could see every single movement of these people in the room for half an hour, or less if they broke out from the room before. And this is also why my team and I work systematically with the help of the change laboratory method, because in the change laboratory, you have a process that spans over usually 1 year time. And of course, it connects with the history before this year and with the visions afterward. But during these sessions, during this minimum of 6 sessions and 2 follow-ups, you usually can see in the video recordings all movements, all initiatives, and really construct a very objective, as much as possible, objective view of the process as it is unfolding. This choice is justified also by the very origin of the double stimulation principle and the method of exchange laboratory, which is the genetic research methodology. I know that there is a question on that, and I hope we can discuss this later. Yet this paper by Nick and Belinda shows that convincing accounts of TAD's progression can also derive from non-video recorded observations and interviews. So should I expand my way of researching TADs? This remains for me an open question as well. Now, as a third step, I will present some points as a critical friend. Number one, the article offers a dialectical conceptualization of, I quote, the relationships between expansive learning, double stimulation, and transformative agency. But is dialectics not intrinsic in each of these processes? Are we risking to enter the domain of a metaphysic of relations, to use Tolman vocabulary? Way before Tolman, Ilienko himself warned us not to be satisfied with focusing on external dialectical relationships between phenomena, concepts, or systems. The core of dialectics is in internal dynamics. Within expansive learning, within double stimulation, within transformative agency. When then the authors, I quote, present dialectical arguments linking transformative agency, volitional action, and expansive learning, are we missing something of the intrinsic dialectical nature of this phenomena? Then one other point of criticism I would like to friendly put forward is the following. It concerns the emphasis on the role of the expanded understanding, which in the expression of the authors, both enables and are produced by volitional actions. So expanded understandings at the same time enable and are produced by volitional actions. For me, it is essential to remember that real understanding, especially in times of crisis, is in action. Leontiev's is clear on this point, and the classic ethnographic studies confirm this emphasis on action, leading to understanding. I am thinking, for instance, about the work of Lucy Satchman. Of course, the other way around is also true. Action does lead to understanding does lead to action. But in critical situations, when it is questioned to learn something which is not yet there, and in the midst of challenging conflict of motives, I like to remind myself that there is no full understanding without action first. Now I'm checking what is going on with my time, and I'm afraid that I only have 1 minute. I could only tell that I would have other issues to discuss, the authors talk about the practice, in my view, the concept of activity, understood in a Lentiovian sense, or activity with division of labor, rules, etc., is a more suitable concept when speaking in terms of transformative agency for double stimulation. And this would be a long issue to discuss, but just to point this out for Nick and the other participants. And then one other issue I would have liked to elaborate on, and we perhaps will have an opportunity today or later on, is what is the role of reiterations? You mentioned this in your own definition of your work on double stimulation, but I missed this in this article, in this analysis, and this is vital in both the Vygotsky description of volitional action by double stimulation, but also in the work, the empirical work that is emerging from that. In my own team, but also among other research, including your own, by the way, your own work before this paper. So I miss, where is the deliberate self-conditioning that demands repeating over and over again the use of a second stimulus in order to acquire novel habits that counteract the conflict of motives. And then one fourth point, which also very much links to the very emotional, indeed, narrative about this little boy who will become a great chef, most likely, is that this work that Nick is doing really is opening up a very interesting dialogue on other possibilities for enacted utopias. Clearly, they are very rare to detect, but perhaps we could also have initiators of enacted utopias, which are the most difficult to identify, the most unlikely to identify, exactly like this little boy. So these were just a few points, just a quick list to say what other issues I could have been covering, but we will probably now leave the space for discussion. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my 2 cents of points on that.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Thank you very much. It was really very interesting. And I think this is indeed a wonderful platform for further discussion. So I already see that people are putting their questions, new questions in chat, the questions that haven't been covered in Nick's presentation. So probably I suggest that we do the following. Those of you who have already sent the questions in advance, and I hope that you can see the answers from Nick. If you have any other questions or comments, or if you feel that your questions were not fully answered, please, this is the time for you to ask or re-ask and comment. You're very welcome.
Yeah, those written answers were more my very brief notes to myself rather than full answers. So I don't expect they'll cover everything. I have noticed Lada has a question here that I could speak to. Is that okay, Olga?
Sure, you're welcome.
And then to come back to some of Annalisa's points, all of your criticisms, Annalisa, I agree, you're right. But Lada's question, must individual motives be in conflict in order to trigger a potentially developmental process? My understanding is, or the way that I've come to work with different parts of the chat literature is, the answer to that will depend on who you're reading. So in Annalisa's model in transformative agency by double stimulation, TADS, yes, there is a conflict. And I don't think that's a trivial thing. I don't think that's an aesthetic choice of word, for example, to choose conflict rather than tension. I think it's a fundamental thing, because from the conflict, you get the significance of that second stimulus and why the new motive is just so powerful, whether that's a mother force feeding her child or trying to resolve homelessness and the political impossibilities of that. And when we are moving towards, trying to enact utopias, I think there's an extreme value in holding very tightly onto principles which unlock that radical sense of possibility. And I think the conflict in Annalisa's model is key to that. I don't think it's just an aesthetic choice to kind of focus on these kinds of situations. However, if, for example, you were to look at Anne Edwards' work, where all sorts of what she calls auxiliary stimuli are used, often there is not a conflict there at all. There might be competing motives between different people. So Anne would often talk, for example, about a group of adults working around a child who might be excluded from a school. Your police officer wants to keep the children safe. The head teacher wants to get the money for the special education for the school. The classroom teacher wants the disruptive child to stop being disruptive or get out. And the parents want the child included. They're not necessarily conflicting motives. They might be competing. They could well be aligned. Now, through Anne's work, you can see how work done in those kind of complex collaborations, absolutely developmental processes can result without necessarily kind of being around conflicts or contradictions. But I'm increasingly coming back to conflicts in the way that Annalisa talks about them, partly because the more I look, the more I see them. When you know how they look, like when you can spot them, you're like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. But also because it's through the conflict that the real radical power of double stimulation occurs. So I think, to me, the conflict is something that's incredibly important. And I think, I wouldn't say missing, but downplayed both in Anne Edwards' work and the other work which inspires me a lot, which is Anna Stepsenko, which kind of, it's similar in its kind of radical social intent, but much less tied to that specific mechanic or mechanism or dynamic between conflict and motive. Annalisa, I think you're absolutely right. Internal dialectics disappear completely in my analysis. What happened was, I think empirically we detected the relationship between those things as kind of not one then the other, but one then the other, then the other, then the other, and one each depending on the other. In looking for a word to describe that relationship, dialectic seemed to be the best word. That was why we ended up with dialectics. But I absolutely agree that the internal intrinsic aspect of it is missing, and it's not faithful to that kind of original emphasis on dialectics, which I think is really important. As to the question of real understanding in action, again, my instinct is to think, I agree, I need to sit down and think really hard about how I'd analytically deal with that when kind of I don't have that temporality, the high precision temporality that you talk about in the video. I think it might be my struggle might be partly because I see my data like a fishing net, right? The fishing net is mainly holes, but nonetheless, if you're fishing, you can catch a big fish, even with something that's mainly holes. A lot of the data I get is like that. It's the string of the net, and I'm trying to land a fish. And I think this is why I get some of these problems that Annalisa is talking about. I'm talking about things that are happening over 18 months, sometimes through sitting there, sometimes through report the next day, sometimes waiting 6 months and getting another 20 minutes. Like it's really tying strings together with a lot of holes. Practice versus activity is going to be on my mind for the next 10 years. I think I'm drawn to it because I spent a good 10 years reading a lot of practice theory, and some ways of working it drive me mad. There's something about, at least at the moment, I find the concepts of practice sometimes gives me a more comfortable way in to not losing sight of the individual when we think of the social, or not losing the social when we think of the individual. And I know you can do that through activity. I'm not saying you can't, but it's really good to be reminded of that problem. The role of iterations and that self-conditioning, it must be there. I can't imagine that these changes could occur without that. It absolutely must be there. It's one of the gaps in my fishing net. It's just, I can't imagine a change like what happened for Ching and Fia happening like without her going over and over again, try the breathing, try this with the food. Young Henry and his cooking must be about the fact that over and over and over again, his parents included him in meals and birthday celebrations and that. I'm absolutely convinced that what you're saying, Annalisa, must be there. I don't necessarily see it in my data, but that's not because it's not there. It's because my data is full of holes. And also because I think there's part of me that finds the language of conditioning a bit behavioralist, and I find it awkward because I just found out that we had a new person in our faculty who's actually a Skinnerian behavioralist, and I didn't think they existed anymore. So I'm very kind of prickly around language that takes me back there. Okay, yeah, Annalisa, I've got to go back to activity versus practice. I think, yeah. I think what activity gives versus practice is a better structured idea of the social. I don't mean the social structures, but we get division of labor and rules, and we get the production, consumption, and distribution. We get all those parts of the social through activity. In practice, we don't. It's a much flatter concept, I think, practice. It's partly there because I spent so long reading on it. Now, there are other questions coming in. So, Olga, would you like to direct us to...
So we have a question from Monica Lemos, which is a bit higher. It's...
yes, the role of collaboration. Now, what were my notes on that? Let's have a look. Just let me. Okay. What's the role of collaboration in the process of double stimulation, Steve? I think collaboration comes into me in two ways. The one is a kind of the more empirically close for me, which is in the settings where professionals were working with parents, collaboration was already there because I was following somebody working with somebody else. And so it was always going to be some kind of interaction and working together on a problem through which these new mediational means or auxiliary stimuli might be found. And in fact, the model of approach that these professionals told me they aspired to was one called partnership. So they very much saw themselves and aspired to be collaborators with parents, not people who go and fix problems for them or fix their children for them, but rather collaborating on a complex problem. So that fits my nice little set of studies on professionals. But when I've been doing this stuff on complex feeding, there's been nobody collaborating with these parents. Like Henry's parents did this. I don't say by themselves because they didn't. It was far from a solo journey, but they didn't do it in a sustained collaboration with anybody else. They did it by cultivating ecologies of support and knowledge and their own instincts, and as a family and with friends. And so I'm not sure collaboration is the word that I'd come out there. I don't think Henry's mum would say she's been collaborating with people. But what's really important, I think, from your question, Monica, is, and I think Annalisa says this, and I think Anna Stetsenko says this also, is that these mediational means don't pop out of nowhere in individual heads. They are, even if the idea of them, like, Henry had the genius idea of using the syringe or whatever it might be, there is always cultural availability of kind of a cultural setting, whether that's one's family's status, all sorts of other things that make these tools available and make their take up possible or not. So culture is also, or society is also the thing that makes some tools not available to certain people, or makes them available but makes it impossible for them to be taken up. And so if, Monica, I could kind of adjust your question to the role of kind of relationships or things beyond the people reading. Absolutely, Monica, and history as well. Interestingly, in all the major cases of change I've seen around children who tube feed, including I'm doing an analysis now of 3 families who managed to take the tube out from their child and help them feed safely, even when the doctors didn't think it was possible. All of those started with chance encounters. One of them on a beach, one of them with the mother-in-law shopping for her blinds, like, you know, curtains in the house, and the other one in a cafe. So you're like, we need models that account. Firstly, I think that shows us just how bad the situation is, because not like, if this kind of chance is what you need to get your child off a feeding tube, that's not okay. That's far from okay. But it also shows you that there are some conditions for these families, be they middle class and connected enough, where these chance encounters can get amplified and become the starting point of these extraordinary trajectories. And what makes it happen in those families and not happen in many other families is not a weakness in the parents, right? It's a lot to do with the cultural availability of tools and the possibility for take-up. And so I think I'd like your question, Monica, because it reminds us that these are, even though these are stories of incredible people doing incredible things, the agency does not belong to them. The agency lies in the actions and the activities, and those always happen in a social setting and become possible through that. So I have no idea if I got anywhere close to what your question was about, Monica.
So we have one more question from Avram Rips about research.
Oh yeah, is there any research on how double stimulation not only transforms the family but not the system? So you've got the 2 questions there. So the second one about feeding therapy, yes, in Australia, the state you're in changes how care works. I'm going to talk a little bit about feeding here, but I think it's an example of why things are how things can become problematic. The problem with feeding problems is there's at least 280 different reasons why they happen. That's the list that the kind of the World Health Organization has got. At least 280 different reasons why your child might have a difficulty eating, which means, although it's everybody's business, it's nobody's business. It's far too everywhere. It's childhood cancer, it's being born early, it's having surgery, heart conditions, everything. And so feeding care for young infants and young children is patchy, sporadic, invisible. We spent a year asking a hospital in Sydney if we could find out how many children are in their hospital who have a feeding tube on any one day. And it took us a year to find out that you can't find that out. It's too difficult. Something as basic as how many children in your hospital have a tube in their nose. Can't tell you. So Avram, it's quite hard to answer your question about exactly what happens to children with feeding difficulties in Australia. It's very different and it's kind of all over the place. But there are in New South Wales 10 multidisciplinary clinics. You have to wait if you can get into them. And that's where you get this kind of speech pathologist, pediatrician, dietitian, an interpreter often, an occupational therapist, and they try and work together, because what that composition says is feeding is a medical problem, a mechanical problem, a social problem, and a kind of a problem of activity that the occupational therapist deals with. You also asked, is there any research on how double stimulation has not only transformed the family, but also the system? Not that I'm aware of in the exact topic that I research, but I think the paper that gets closest to doing that, if you switch the word family for something else, is that one that Aidan Ball has just published. Irio, you sent it out earlier. I've got it here. It's called An Indigenous Learning Lab, and Aidan Ball, Aaron Birdbear, Dosen Co, and Linda Ori. I'll put the citation in the chat for you now. What I think that is using is a formative intervention to tackle in the context of and to tackle historical racism, deeply historical racism. There, I think you're getting it, kind of double stimulation and a system change. And in Annalisa's work on homelessness, I'm not quite sure in my research what the system would be, but that's what we're trying to figure out in the feeding thing, is because feeding is so all over the place, we couldn't draw, I'm not sure I could draw the activity system for it because it's just everywhere and nowhere. It's so hard to grasp that we're not quite sure exactly what the system is, where we'd see it. Anyway, yes, I waffled a bit there. Thanks, Annalisa. Yes, in the wild, you covered it.
Okay, so any other questions and comments from those of you who were sending the questions in advance? You're very welcome to say something, please.
Hi, Olga. Is it okay if I ask?
It's great.
Yeah.
It's Anna.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for your wonderful presentation, and Annalisa, your feedback as well. I just want to understand, like, from the carer's point of view, have you ever come across some conflicts that they might face in bringing kind of resolution or trying to solve the conflict with the families? So what's their reflections on their work, and how do they deal with that, or how do you advise, or if you understand my question?
I think so. So you're talking about those professionals who go and support the families.
Yeah.
And do the conflicts come up for them in the work they do with the parents? Yes, absolutely they do. Some of them many times a day, and some of them quite unusually. The ones that come up many times a day are the urge to fix something versus the imperative not to fix it. By which I mean is often a nurse who's been working for 30 years will often see a child struggling to sleep, and they'll, in their heads, they'll be like, I could do this in 10 minutes. And yet they know that's not their job. Their job is to empower the parents and for them, because as soon as you start fixing things for parents, they feel judged and you reinforce that they were useless in the first place. Right. And so they know how dangerous it is to go in and fix things for parents, how disempowering also and judging it can be. So they have this conflict between, I want to fix this and I know I shouldn't, kind of thing, which is why they have these models of partnership to try and help them get out there. But what happens is, historically what that conflict has manifested as is a retreat from expertise. So they worrying that if they use their expertise, they're going to become this bossy expert who fixes everything. It's been documented that what many of these nurses and social workers and other people have done is kind of swing back too far and just be nice. And you don't need somebody to come around and be nice. You can have friends who be nice to you. Like, you've got a nurse around because she's a nurse and she's qualified and she knows stuff. And so a lot of my research has been about trying to express the pathways in which expertise gets used in this kind of work without it being a bossy expert who fixes things for you. So they're always talking about resisting the urge to fix.
Okay.
An example of that comes up when a mother might say, my child struggles to sleep, and when I've got my baby and I just need my older child to not scream when I put them down, so I give them some boiled sweets and it seems to help and they fall asleep. Now, most nurses will be going, boiled sweets? No! Like, stop, not good. And like the partnership model would say, not good to say, boiled sweets is terrible, stop it. Not good to say, well, that's interesting, I wonder if you could try something else. Like maybe we could replace the sweet with the dummy. You've already judged the parent there. Next time you might not get let in the house. Like, you don't know what else is going on. What the model advocates saying is, oh gosh, boiled sweets, I wonder what it is about them that they found so helpful in getting to sleep. And so you use the boiled sleep as an invitation for the parent to wonder about their child, to empathize with the child, to show how much they know the child. So that's one conflict. The other end of the spectrum is the conflict which is very, very clear in law, which is if there is a child protection concern, you do not have a choice, you have to report it. That's the law. So any kind of mention of domestic violence in a situation where there is a child, these professionals are bound by law to report it, but they don't always. I've been in quite a few situations. They make a judgment. Annalisa, you know from the first paper I came and talked in Helsinki about this, there was a mother who was feeling suicidal, and she'd mentioned wanting to jump off a balcony in the morning. Now, by law, that should have been reported, but the nurse felt that that was unlikely to happen again. She could come back the next day. And if she was coming back and they were working on it, it was safer for her to be coming back into the house every day than to report it and to the mother to refuse all assistance and think that the government was getting in the way. So that's a tricky thing, right? And so it's both a tricky thing and I think a real conflict, because breaking the law is a very big deal as a professional in that kind of situation. Getting it wrong is also a really big deal, like getting it wrong in terms of how things go with the parent. So yes, conflicts do come up with them. And there's another one, which is, and I've written a paper about this, there was one time when, because the nurses didn't understand what really mattered to the parents, they were suggesting a certain approach to settling a child and the parents were actively resisting it. We see that kind of conflict as well. So an encouragement of something by the professional and pushback from the parent. And typically that happens because what parents state as the goals, what they would like to see in their child, is not the same as what matters to them. So the parent saying, I want my child to sleep more through the night, does not reveal the most important piece of information, which is, I'm not comfortable when my child cries and I want them to take the lead when we put them to sleep. Without that piece of information, you can, in all good will, suggest some ways to help your child go to sleep. And if they involve the child crying, the parent's going to resist. That kind of conflict comes up as well.
Okay. So how do you then empower these carers? I'm using your own word instead of fixing them.
Some of
the strategies, yeah.
I need to answer this carefully because I wouldn't necessarily claim that I have been successful in doing so, but I will say that my attempts to do so have been around, inspired in a way by the concept of mirror data from the Change Laboratory, which is helping the professionals see themselves as capable and part of the solution. I know full well that as somebody who works in university, when things aren't the way I'd like them, I blame the people upstairs. It's my manager's fault that I don't have the conditions I want to do. I always look somewhere else for the problem and for the solution. It's never my fault and it's never up to me. Like that's my, I'm sure many of us feel that way when we get grumpy with our institutions. So what I think is really powerful about mirror data in the Change Laboratory is people see themselves in it. And so they can also see themselves in the solution. And a lot of these child and family health professionals are generally seen by others and therefore internalize it and see themselves as the bottom of the hierarchy in the health system. People just think they hug babies all day and maybe change the odd nappy in a relatively low skilled form, brain surgery is the top, child and family nursing, home visiting, pretty close to the bottom of. I try and hold a mirror up that says, no, what you do is actually really difficult, really important, really full of craft. And then going back to that thing that they said, we don't need you to tell us we need more time and money, is here are things that you're already doing that are really, really important and make a difference. You could do more of them with more intent or particularly finesse and get even better outcomes without having to have double the amount of time with your parents. So it's kind of holding up a mirror that really legitimizes the work they do in a way that they feel known. And I kind of have this idea of trying to be an intimate outsider. Intimate, I really know things about their job that nobody else knows, but I'm not also them. I can use words that they don't use. And coming from me, I can get away with saying things that they can't feel comfortable saying themselves. If I can, as an intimate outsider, hold up that mirror with some ways of saying, you could do more of this, or or these are the kind of things that really are gold in what you're doing. That's the intent I've been to do this. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, Annalisa, there was a question on genetic.
Yeah, I think this is this one. Do you think double stimulation or Change Laboratory replaces the idea of genetic experiments?
Annalisa, do you want to take that one?
Okay, all right. Yes, I can pick up on this one. I prefer not to think in terms of splits or replacements of foundational knowledge. And I see definitely genetic research methodology as foundational in everything we do in chat. And the strength of chat is in its intergenerational developments. So this is something that is also very much in the focus in everything I try to do. In my view, the change laboratory would not exist without genetic research methodology. It's at the very core of the change laboratory, the idea that the change laboratory can, with the help of the change laboratory, we can objectively research expansive learning and transformative agency by, to an extent, provoking these processes with the help of first stimuli deriving from our ethnographic field work done before the change laboratory starts, and then also first stimuli collected throughout the process of the change lab, which is meticulously video recorded, and then we use clips for that. But also with the help of second stimuli, which are, in the case of the change laboratory, theoretical tools, theoretical models stemming from our work, like the system of activity, like the cycle of expansive learning, and now also, finally, this is becoming more at the center of discussions, the zone of proximal development organized as a four-field model. So yes, I think that without genetic research methodology, there would not be change lab.
I think there's an interesting point there, and it was really important for me to read your answer to that earlier question about in the wild, Annalisa, that I think in this move to reclaim agency within chat, and I think it's not only about bringing the concept of agency and turning up the volume on it within chat, it's also, as Annalisa said in her reflections, is that if as social scientists we're trying to deal with agency, chat needs to be louder in that discussion, right? So we need to turn up the volume of agency in chat, and then we need to turn up the volume of chat in discussions of agency, right? Yes. Now, if we're to be successful in that reclaiming of agency, because chat can deal with agency in better ways than everybody else as well. If we're to do that, there also has to be a methodological kind of awakening or resetting of things. And I think we're, this is not about inventing things anew, but intensifying and being playful in other ways. So what I loved about Annalisa's work was a revisiting of an experiment, but in a delightfully unruly way, particularly when the weighting experiment with the collectives. Like, you just surrendered so much control and neatness and all that stuff. But out of that came, God, the analysis must have been horrendous, but out of it comes such powerful insights. And so this notion of experimentation in the wild, I do accept the kind of the correction that Annalisa gets, that wild does not mean out of experimentation or intervention. What it means is outside of control. And I think if we're going to take agency seriously, we have to think differently about what it means to control things as a researcher, and to be much more de-centered as researchers. Like, the more I look at, I work with families like Henry's, like, who am I as a researcher to, nudge things like there's incredible stories of agency happening around. So I think we need to become more sensitive to agency around us, but more involved in it, but not as the central figures. As the involvement of researchers should make agency possible in ways it wouldn't otherwise be, absolutely. So I think there's a kind of, a methodological playfulness is going to have to come if we're going to really reclaim agency, including getting dirty in the idea of change. And I think part of this, and this is where the kind of methodology and theory are not helpfully separated. Annalisa, you talk about enacted utopias. And I think as a social science more generally, I don't think we're very good at dealing with the future, because I think people tend to find it either that if we get too concrete about it, we're being naive. We're drawing and kind of any concrete future that you draw too concretely, people will find a hole in it, you know, or tell you you're on the path back through, you know, kind of confining ourselves to repeat historical catastrophes where people have tried to do that. Alternatively, the future becomes something so vague as to be so slippery that there's no warping, there's nothing to anchor from. I honestly think we generally find the future really hard to do. And so we need ways to be precise yet open about the future. If we're really going to be dealing with agency seriously, we need to be precise yet open about the future. We don't have all the answers, but we need precision in the direction we're going. And precision will have many forms, moral forms, certainly, the kind of ethical basis for what we think this future will be based on ideas of, you know, social justice or equality or other things. And I think, yeah, the wild, if you combine that need for precision yet openness with this, the idea of wildness and the kind of the fuzzy notions of control, that's intimidating, but also really exciting, because I don't think more of the same is going to really get us where we want. I don't think that, I'm not saying that that displaces things that we've been doing, but I do think I'm looking forward to seeing over the next 5 or 10 years some really playful ways of working. Playful, but really principled. Like, you know, kind of, yeah. Go on, Annalisa.
If I could jump in on this, this has been also, as we move toward the tracing of enacted utopias, and the main rationale behind it is to try to see how we social scientists can possibly contribute to the making of enacted utopias, because one thing is sure, scientists of our generation are facing an unprecedented challenge to become meaningful in this process of changing the world from catastrophic scenarios. And so how can we do chat work in ways that can be consequential is perhaps also one aspect of what we are talking about. And more precisely, you were referring about how can we possibly avoid naivete in our approach to the future. I couldn't be more in agreement with you about the need of being precise, and precision stem, because we are scientists, stem from proceeding with analytical method. Now, in my view, it is essential. This brings back to the connection with the concept of activity. If you have the concept of activity and the activity system as one theoretical tool in a process of transformation, you have an instrument with the help of which the participants can analyze the present and can analyze the future, can analyze the past and the present. And on this basis, future perspectives can be emerging. But it doesn't come from discussion alone. It comes from hands-on analytical work on empirical data collected in a specific setting. This is particularly important in my view, and this links to your issue before when you said that conflict of motives are not an accidental choice of terminology. This entails a big risk. When we enter the realm of a conflict of motives, we enter deep-seated emotional states, and especially those researchers within chat who are not psychologists are very badly equipped with facing this. I know that from Moscow, we have the wonderful work that has been so inspiring for me from Vasiliuk, which has dealt very in-depth with the conflict of motives, how to face them, but with the tools of psychology. we who are not psychologists, we have to be very careful when we conduct formative interventions and we build our transformation process by opening up conflict of motives. Because we are not psychologists, we have to be extra careful. And one way of doing this is to move from the conflict to the contradiction. What are conflict of motives at the end? They are experienced contradictions, but the contradictions are not located at the level of individual actions. They are located at the level of systems and intrasystemic dynamics of activities as historically developed formation. So we are not responsible as individual human beings for the contradictions that are so much paralyzing our action, interactions, etc., in our daily life and daily work. Now, this shift from individual conflict to their source, which are historical contradictions, is a move that in the context, for instance, of a formative intervention as a change laboratory, you can do, and it is very important you do it because you don't have the instruments necessarily as the psychologists have to enter these dynamics of inner conflict of motives.
Thanks, Annalisa. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That is extremely interesting and exciting. Do we have any other questions or comments from the other participants? Anyone who would like to contribute to the discussion? I think there are so many layers that you have touched upon, and so many thoughts.
I think in that I could go back to one of the written questions and expand a little bit, which was the first one that I came through was about how we might try and foster or enhance students' agency in learning. And I think that's a really interesting question because in itself, it suggests that agency is something that can be fostered. And Annalisa, earlier you mentioned, kind of, do we actually have, the frameworks for fostering agency? And the article that Irio and Jos Nuttall and I wrote introducing the special issue, which one of your recent papers was, Annalisa, we're kind of saying we're getting there, but we're not there. But I think you need to ask this kind of question more and more, because when you ask it, you demand an answer. Kind of how do you pedagogically facilitate the agency of others? However, I think when we ask it, we also need to be careful. And the two things that make me want to be careful in asking that kind of question. One is a confronting conversation I had with somebody a few years ago when instead of agency, I was talking a lot about resilience. And this person came to me and said, I have a problem with resilience, Nick, and that is because it's usually white middle-class people telling everybody else they don't have enough of it. I'll say it again, that this person said that resilience tended to be talked about by white middle-class people about other people, and those white middle-class people were saying that resilience was something those others lacked, when actually it was probably the other way around. Or at least very doubtful that these people being talked about lacked the resilience that supposedly they did. So then we get to a point, so that firstly made me think around we just want to be careful to avoid deficit discourses, questions that start from the assumption of something lacking. But your question was really nice because it said enhanced and elaborate on the role. So I don't think that was there in the wording of that question, but I think it points to the need to be careful. The other thing is when we ask the question, we set the terms for our answer. And now this has been me kind of, in some senses, unfairly picky on the question, but I think it takes me to a conceptual point, which I'm going to be working on this year, and Annalisa knows what's coming. If we say, how can agency be enhanced in learners, or students apostrophe agency, the implication is that agency belongs to a person. And I'm not sure that it does. I think where that takes me, and I'm not necessarily it has to take you there, or it necessarily does, but for me, when I talk about this student agency or that student's agency, the answer to the question of where do I find it is I look inside them somewhere. And I don't think that's a very chat thing to do. I think if I get anything from Vygotsky, is that if a learner is struggling, we don't look inside them, we look outside at their relationships, at their social context, at the material environment around them. We have to ask questions of agency in the same way that lead us to look outside of the person's brain, or not wait for some magical development to happen in them where agency suddenly springs forth. For me, a lot of that comes to do with language that it tries to avoid agency being a possession, something I walk into a room with more of or less of than the person who follows me. So absolutely, I'd be very interested in questions about how we can amplify the agency of students' actions as learners. That works for me. Like an action you can take could be more or less agentic. I think that's fine. And that doesn't lead me to look inside the student for the answer, or to blame the student when they don't have it. It also helps me think that a student might be able to act very agentically in their history lessons and absolutely be paralyzed in their sports lessons. Right? It doesn't make sense to think of agency as something you have if in the space of 3 minutes and moving 5 meters down the corridor, it can suddenly disappear. It's just like, I think we need, yeah. So that's me saying about the question itself without actually getting anywhere close to answering it. I'm working with a school at the moment where each department is trying to enhance learning outcomes, a particular learning outcome. And what we're finding over and over again, this is a pretty nice school, like a private school, is that interestingly, the teachers do not talk in a deficit way about their students. They don't think they don't know anything. They don't think they're lazy or like anything like that. What they think is that the students kind of don't get what's being asked of them and kind of give up to, they think their job's done. Like they're given a question to work on, like explain why, they get asked to write about an artwork. In their art studies, they're asked to criticize a Van Gogh painting or a Matisse or something. And the students go, oh, it made me feel happy and it made me feel sad. And they think they're done. And they're not, like, that's not what they're asked. And this makes me think of the language that Marianne Hedegaard uses, which is, it's very important that learners recognize what's being demanded of them in a situation. That in order to make really good use of the tools and supports around them, you have to know what's being asked of you. You have to know what's being demanded of you. And I think that's what these teachers are trying to do in this school, is to help students realize what it is that they're being asked to do. Because if you assume it, the chances are students are going to have quite a different idea. And they might think, yeah, oh, I'm doing this over here. It's like if I'm marking essays this afternoon and we called it a persuasive essay, and half the students seem to get what a persuasive essay is, and half of them didn't seem to realize what I was asking them to do was persuade me of something. And however beautifully they wrote, if they didn't persuade me of something, they can't get a good mark. So I think in this kind of case, that there'll be something in the emergence of agency among agentic actions among learners is in an educational setting where there's so much assessment and you're thinking about performance, that helping learners recognize what's being demanded of them is likely to be part of the answer, I think, somewhere. Because if there's no recognition of demands, I can't see how all the scaffolding in the world or anything else is going to be much use, because students just, yeah, go on, Annalisa.
Yeah, but this is a very important point you're emphasized, which requires taking into consideration issues of rules, division of labor. So in fact, you mentioned the crucial importance of language. I would say that in addition to that, together with that, we need to also have instruments of assessment of the systemic and cross-systemic functionality of the activities in which we live, in which we place our children to learn, and so on. This question that you are asking, what is it that we demand these children in school, can only be answered by looking very carefully into the system of division of labor, for instance. And the fact is that we do not know how to do that. We can go as far as focusing on interaction between people, but the systemic level is still the most difficult to tackle in change processes. And still change depends on them, on this type of instruments. I'm trying to convince you that you really should make a shift to activity.
Yeah, I noticed you trying. Very subtly. I
will not give up till I see this.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have just enough time for some comments and questions from our audience. Please, anyone?
I'm curious, are other people interested in agency? Do you know some interesting people working on agency that we should go and read? Do you see agency? Do you think you saw somebody do something agentic last week? Like, no, I think the world is full of agency.
Okay, so I think a lot of information, a lot of thoughts. So actually, if possible, I would use this pause. I think it is an extremely interesting discussion, a discussion which touches upon so many different challenges and problems, which are actually in all possible spheres and fields. As you've mentioned about food, that it is actually everywhere. I think what you've been discussing is indeed everywhere, and I think we shall continue this very interesting talk. So I am inviting all of you to contribute to the special issue of our journal, Cultural Historical Psychology, which we are preparing for summer. It is going to be edited in summer, but the deadline for paper submission is actually end of May. So I've already invited Nick and I've invited Annalisa. If Annalisa has a possibility to contribute, that would be really, really wonderful. But also all of the participants, all the guests of the Reading Club are also very welcome. And we could make a special piece devoted to the discussion of agency and double stimulation. So because I think this is really a very, very interesting and important topic. I'm also inviting you for further discussions on the pages of our website and in our group on Facebook. I think it's also a good platform for sharing ideas and maybe posting some questions and comments after the meetings, because sometimes I've noticed that during the meeting we have some maybe ideas and some fragments of thoughts, but we often need more time to think over and then try to write it down. So we can use our online resources for that. And definitely I wanted to say thank you very much to Nick, and thank you very much to Annalisa for this absolutely dynamic and very vivid and lively presentation and discussion.
My pleasure. I'm just going to leave you with the picture of Henry, the boy who supposedly could never eat. There he is, eating his own creation. Like,
yeah, that is a wonderful picture. That is a wonderful picture. Very
His enacted utopia. There you go.
very motivating and very inspiring. So thank you for this wonderful evening or morning, whatever, and thank you to all the participants, and I hope to see you again on this platform of Moscow Chat Reading Club.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Olga. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of you.
Hope to
Thank
see you
you.
again.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Same. Bye
See you,
bye.
Monica.
Bye. See you.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.